Hi, everyone. It's lovely to see so many names joining us today for this webinar, and lots of familiar names as well. I would say familiar faces, but I can't quite see your faces, but I do see your names. So thank you so much for giving your time to spend with us today as we think about how we can support you to give every baby the best start for life. For people who I haven't met, I'm Matt Price. I'm the Director of Research and Grants here at the 1001 Critical Days Foundation, and joined today by Kat Smith, who's our brilliant grants officer. If I could get the next
Hello.
slide.
Oh,
Thanks,
sorry.
Kat.
Yes.
Yeah, it's okay. So a very warm welcome. We're going to cover three main things today. The first is to share a little bit about who we are as the 1001 Critical Days Foundation. As many of you will know, we're brand new. So this is our first public-facing event. And so we're absolutely delighted to be telling you a little bit about who we are and why we think the 1001 days are so critical. We'll then give an overview of our charity grants. So we know that that's why you've joined us today. And Kat will be bringing the guidance that we've published to life. And last but not least, we'll have a chance to ask any questions. Don't feel like you have to wait until the very end to ask your questions. You should be able to see a little question and answer function in the chat box. So it should say Q&A rather than chat. If you post any questions that you have there as we go through, that would be absolutely brilliant. And it might be that you see a question come through that you think is a really, really good one. If you upvote that, so press the little up arrow, what that does is it brings it to the top of our page. And so we can prioritize answering the questions that are most important to most people on the call this morning. But more questions, the better. We are a brand new charity and we're new to grant giving in this space. So we really want to answer the questions that are most important to you. And we will be publishing a frequently asked questions document based on the questions that you ask today after the webinar as well. So please do feel free to ask as many questions as you like. If there's an important question and we don't get a chance to answer it in the webinar, then we will be sure to include that in the frequently asked questions summary. Just to say as well, after the webinar, we will be inviting your feedback on how you have experienced the webinar, what you liked, what you found helpful, maybe what you found less helpful, and we should improve for future webinars as well. Because we're new to this and we want to collaborate with you and be sure to work together with you to make grant giving the best it can possibly be, recognizing how important it is to give babies the best start for life. So we will absolutely be inviting your feedback at this stage and at every stage through our grant giving process. So we're starting as we mean to go on. Thank you very much, Kat. If I could have the next slide, please. I know that I'm going to be preaching to the choir in setting out why the 1001 days from pregnancy to the age of 2 are so critical. But it feels like it's a really important thing to start with as we think about why it's important for us to be awarding charity grants for people working on the front line to support babies. So we know that this time is a unique period of development, both in terms of how the brain develops, the immune system, a baby's gut biome, our biological systems and our immune system, the experiences that we have in this time from pregnancy to age 2 really do shape the adults we'll become. And so it's really important that we give babies the best start for life and that we support parents and carers to give babies the best start for life. So that's why we recognize the importance of these early days. And that's why the 1001 Critical Days Foundation was founded. So Dame Andrea Leadsom is our founder. Many of you will know Dame Andrea. She has been a tireless advocate for babies over the past 30 years when she was founding charities to support babies, when she was the government's early years advisor, and when she was Minister for Start for Life as well. Dame Andrea has now stepped back from politics and is absolutely committed that the 1001 Critical Days Foundation will support babies to have the best start for life, both in the UK and around the world. If I can have the next slide, please, Kat. You'll probably have gathered from this that Kat and Matt is the new Ant and Dec. So we're working together on our slide deck and our approach to grant giving. So you'll forgive me as we do the dream team around the webinar today. So we are absolutely determined that every baby should experience the best start for life, but we know that babies need a lot of support and parents need a lot of support to give their baby the best start for life. So what we see our purpose as being is enabling charities and researchers to be armed with information and support that they need to support parents and carers to give their baby the best start for life. And there are three ways that we're going to do this. So the first is charity grants. And so that's why we're here today. We're launching our first ever round of grant giving. And we're delighted to be able to invest £1 million in our first charity grants to organizations that are doing brilliant work to support babies and families in the UK. We'll also be commissioning research, and we're currently running a survey to find out what researchers and professionals and policymakers think are really important questions that need to be answered in the 1001 Critical Days space. And we'll take the responses from that survey and form a long-term research funding agenda so that we can know with real confidence what works to support babies and how we can best support you to support babies as well. Last but not least, we know that babies around the world should experience the best start for life. So we're going to be engaging in global advocacy, so supporting other countries who want to get better policies, systems, and programs in place that can give babies the best start for life. So that's a little whirlwind tour about what we'll do. In terms of how we'll do it then, we've got some really clear values that are at the heart of our organization. These values will really drive us as a charity, and hopefully you'll be able to see these values and understand how they resonate with the work that you're doing as well. So if we start with compassionate, when we're thinking about supporting babies and parents in this critical period, it has to start from a place of compassion and warm relationships. So that's really important to us. We know that'll be really important to you too. Collaborative, we don't want just to be a funder that gives money and never speaks to you ever again. We would love to work together with you to support your projects and support you in this really vital work. You'll probably have gathered that action orientated is an important value for us. So we don't just want to be a charity that is big on words and little on action. So we want to focus on our activities that can have the biggest action and impact for babies and their families, which leads us really nicely onto impactful. So we are a research-driven charity. That means that we'll be looking really clearly for how we are building evidence-based practice and practice-based evidence. And your support with that as charities that might receive a grant from us in terms of how you evaluate your services and test and demonstrate your impact will be brilliant, because we know that while we have some funding to give away, the magnitude of funding that's available from governments around the world to invest in babies is much, much higher. And so what we'd love to do is use the impact that we can generate from the grants that we give to make a really clear and compelling case to governments and decision makers that there is really no choice but to invest in babies. So I hope that you see there the importance of our values in our charity grant giving in everything that we do. We're going to be holding ourselves to account for those values in every step of the journey. Before I hand it over in Ant and Dec style to Kat to tell you a little bit about the grant giving process and the application process, what we're looking for, I wanted to just say that we're making some real progress at pace here at the 1001 Critical Days Foundation. Many of you will probably have Googled us to try and find out what we're doing and how we're doing it. And you will have noticed that we don't yet have a website. We had a dilemma early on about whether we wait for our website to get off the ground or whether we crack on with trying to award some grants as quickly as possible. And we heard really strongly from charities that it's a really difficult funding landscape. And so it felt unethical for us to wait until we had our website off the ground before we started to give away our charity grants. So we registered with the Charity Commission in March. We've only just formed as a small but mighty team here in the 1001 Critical Days Foundation. And we've launched our grant round really rather swiftly. What that means is that we might not get everything right along the way. And as part of our collaborative value, we would love to hear from you if you think that there's things that we should be doing more of or less of to support you in your work. And as we go forward with our charity grant giving, our research grant giving, and our international advocacy, we're establishing advisory boards that will help to steer us along the way. They won't have a governing function, so we're very lucky to have a board of trustees that is tremendously talented, and they will hold us to account for delivery. But the advisory boards will be made up of international experts in the 1001 Critical Days to make sure that we're focused on all the right priorities. I used a lot of words there in not a lot of time. I hope that made sense. I'm not sure if we've got very many questions coming through. Oh, brilliant. We're seeing some questions already come through. Don't forget to hit that little uptick button if you think there's a question that's worth us prioritizing. Kat, before we go into your slides, is there anything that you think that I've missed or would be helpful for us to repeat?
No, I think that's everything for now. So shall I just run into the overview of charity grants then? Yes. Okay.
Thank you so much.
Hello, everyone. So basically, we have our guidelines on LinkedIn right now because we don't have the website. So I'd encourage you to read those in full. But what we're going to do now is flag a few of the most important points from those guidelines. So I think the first thing is about the type of work we're hoping to fund. So it's direct work with babies from pregnancy to the age of 2. This could be with parents of babies, but you'd need to very clearly show in your application how this would directly impact the lives of babies. The next thing is that we're looking to fund work taking place in family hub style settings. And by this, we mean settings which enable universal access and one-stop shop style support where families can access a range of services under one roof. And this universal access point is really important for us because we want them to be able to access support in as non-stigmatizing environment as possible. The next thing is about activities that make a meaningful and measurable difference to the lives of babies. So our guidance document outlines that in a bit more detail, but it would ideally include a measure taken before the intervention and after the intervention. And then the last thing on this front is that we prefer to fund projects that have secured funding from other sources as well. And this is because we know that projects are much more likely to be sustainable if they have buy-in from multiple different sources and aren't reliant on just one funder. Is there anything you'd like to add on this front, Matt?
No, that's brilliant. Thank you so much.
Okay, perfect. And the next thing is about our eligibility criteria. So there's a few basic things that we can and cannot fund. So the first thing is that for this funding round, you have to be a registered charity, and we can't accept applications from other forms of legal entities like CICs. That might change in the future, but that's not the case for this funding round. The next thing is that you have to have been established as a charity for at least 2 years and have a set of accounts on the Charity Commission website. And we can't fund capital projects or individuals, and we also can't fund events or conferences as standalone projects, but we could support events as part of a wider project. And I think Matt touched upon this earlier, but we can't fund academic research at this point. We will be funding it, and we'll have announcements coming up on our website soon, but this is not the application process for that. Okay, so the next thing is, what are we looking for in the organisations we fund? So there's one really key thing here, and that's a strong track record of delivering work with babies and a deep understanding of their needs. And this is the most crucial thing that we'll be looking for in the whole of the application. The next thing is a commitment to sharing your learnings beyond your organisation and local area. So we know there's a lot of really great work happening in this space, but we also know that charities are super busy and they can't always find the time to create events and amplify their learning by themselves. So all this to say, if you are doing that work, that's great. But if not, we don't expect you to do this by yourself. We just want to work with you to create those opportunities. So that could be supporting a webinar that we run, or writing a blog about your work, or attending a conference that we facilitate. So Matt, do you have anything else to add before we move on to the application process?
No, that looks brilliant to me, Kat. Thank you.
Okay. So I am going to run through this really rapidly because we want to get to the Q&As essentially, but I hope this is helpful. So the next bit is about how you can go about applying. So we have a two-stage process. The first is an online application form, which we have an eligibility quiz at the start. It's simple yes/no questions to check if you meet the basic eligibility criteria and whether we could potentially fund you. The next, we have a main application form where we're asking questions about your organisation and about the project you're seeking funding for. And as part of that application process, we're asking for some key documents. So that's your organisational strategy and accounts, and a project budget and project plan. And one thing we really want to flag is that the deadline for that is the Sunday, the 27th of July at midnight. And we are working to some really tight timelines for this funding round. So we can't accept applications after that date. So we really encourage you to meet that deadline. The next stage after that is if you're shortlisted, we want to have some additional questions by email, and we'll have an online meeting with shortlisted applicants as well. And the key thing to note there is that we'll be holding those meetings between the 18th and 27th of August. So please do try and make sure that someone from your organisation who knows your organisation well and your project well is available to talk to us in that timeframe. Okay, so the next thing is about how we will assess your application. So the first thing to note is that everything will be looked at through the lens of potential impact for babies, and we want this to come out loud and clear in your application. So we'll be looking at things like the evidence of need for the work that you're proposing, and the evidence that the intervention will make a meaningful and measurable impact on the lives of babies. And then underneath that, we'll be looking at a lot of the things that you're probably used to with other application forms. So those are track record. Have you strongly demonstrated your experience of delivering high impact work with babies? Project quality. Is the project plan robust and is the budget clear? Leadership and governance. What experience does your leadership team have in managing and delivering work with babies? And what skills are represented on your board and how engaged are trustees with your work? Policies and safeguarding. Do you have robust policies in place to ensure effective delivery of your work? And also we'll want to know a bit more about the processes that you have in place to keep babies and families safe when you're working with them. Then in terms of finances and fundraising, we'll want to know your reserves position, where your income is coming from, and what your fundraising plans are going forward. And then with staff training and support, we'll want to know, is there a strong culture of supporting staff and providing ongoing training and development opportunities? So a couple of things to note here is that we'll get some of this through the written application, but some of it will come in the meeting and extra questions at the second stage. And then we should also note that a lot of the points overlap between these different sections. So for example, leadership and governance is also a really important element of project quality. Matt, do you have anything else to add?
No, that all sounds really good, Kat. Thank you very much.
Perfect. So now we're at the Q&A session. So I will stop sharing the screen, and then we can open up the questions.
Thank you very much. I think that the top one there is a really good question. So thank you, Vicky, for asking this. So the question is that we prefer to fund projects that support a larger number of babies. And a really good question, what does that mean? And how, what does that mean in terms of smaller charities with a smaller number of beneficiaries wishing to apply? Really, this question boils down to the amount of funding that you're applying for and how we might need to compare that with other charities applying for the similar amount of funding. So if you might imagine a situation where we've got two charities applying for the same amount of funding, and one of them is demonstrating that they can reach many more babies, then we would prefer to fund the project that meets more babies. What we're absolutely not trying to do with that as being our preference is to try and rule out smaller charities from applying. We see small charities as well as larger charities being a really important part of the ecosystem that supports babies and families. So that's kind of where we were coming from there, but it definitely does not rule out small charities. We are really encouraging small charities to apply. And that's one of the reasons why we haven't put like a minimum amount of funding that you might apply for, because we recognize smaller charities might not need as much funding, but some kind of core funding over several years can be really helpful still. I hope that helps.
And then that kind of links to a question from Lucy. Is there a maximum organization size or income that can apply? And you've already answered it in the comment, but I just wanted to flag that no, there's not. There's no minimum and there's no maximum.
Thank you very much. Then we've got a question about Home Start working with family hubs, but also in the home with babies. Yes, really good question. So if you're unsure about the Family Hubs and Start for Life programme, it's really worth checking out the gov.uk guide around Family Hubs and Start for Life. That guidance goes into loads of detail around the principles that make a setting a family hub setting. One of the principles is that support for babies and families should be available in person, so within the family hub, but should also be available online and through outreach support. So if your model taps each of those or two of those, then that absolutely fits with it being part of a family hub. What we wouldn't want to do is fund support that is entirely outreach and not at all in a family hub, or entirely online and not at all within a family hub. And our rationale for that is that we believe really strongly that the family hub model, that place that is universal and welcoming to everyone, is a place that will break down the stigma of accessing support. And so we want that one-stop shop model that we know is really important to parents and carers to flourish through some of the funding that we're giving. So as long as the support that you're offering is in a family hub as well as online or in somebody's home, then that absolutely fits with our definition of what we mean by a family hub. I also saw some questions about what we mean by family hubs in a different sort of way. Let me see if I can find it. Oh, here we go. So there's a question from Tara about the Family Hub link. And if the Family Hub is local authority run, does that mean that you need some engagement with local authority for that? Yes, it does. Hopefully, the idea that you could get funding if you engage with the local authority might be a really good hook for the local authority to listen to you and to offer you that space. Again, what we're trying to avoid is what parents and carers often say is that kind of fragmentation of support when they've got a baby. So again, we're hoping that the family hub model or its equivalent, if you're working in a place that doesn't have something that's branded a family hub but operates in the same sort of way, will create that wraparound one-stop shop for parents and carers. Are there any other questions, Kat, that you can spot that are family hub related? While I'm on a family hub roll, maybe I could answer more of those.
Here. So there's one question from Becca. Going to a family hub location is not universally accessible, as many families struggle to access services and leave their homes due to their needs. Does it have to be delivered in a hub? If not, how does the programme ensure that those who offer traditional services find it hard to engage and are often the most marginalised are centred in this work?
Yeah, it's a really important question. And again, I'm hoping that this sort of grant and the way that we're approaching supporting family hubs through our grant giving will help to shine a spotlight on places where family hubs are maybe not delivered in the way that's as inclusive as they could be. If you read the Family Hubs and Start for Life programme guide, inclusivity is a really important point. And we see that family hubs are part of a proportionate universalism, so that everything can be offered within a family hub, and then more targeted support can be accessed through that family hub as well, either in person, through outreach, or online. But if you try and offer the targeted support without that universal open access sort of setting of a family hub, what we notice is some of the families who are most likely to experience marginalization or discrimination actually end up feeling othered and put in a different box that can be too hard to deal with or hard to reach. And ultimately they get less support. So we're really hoping that our support will kind of embed that family hub model across local areas, whether it's a kind of an official family hub that's funded in England through the Family Hubs and Start for Life programme, or a community setting in Wales, for example, that is embedding those Nest framework ideas and joining up support there. The word family hub is not as important as the idea that we're creating open access, universal support that brings all families into that setting.
Matt, so there's some questions that you've responded to in comments really quickly. Do you want us to flag those as well, so that
let's choose ones that we haven't responded to in comments, but that have been upticked.
Okay. So Katie is asking about the average grant size. Can you see that question?
I can see that question. What a good question. We really don't know. So this is our first time of doing this. So we won't know until we receive your applications how many of you are looking for the larger grants, like up to the 100K over 5 years, how many of you are looking for smaller grants for over fewer years. And so we wouldn't really be able to answer that question at this stage. Recognize that's really tricky because it might influence your decision about whether to apply for us or not. But we would be kind of lying if we pretended that we knew what you might be looking for.
I think
there would be no. Sorry, Kat. I was just going to say there'd be no disadvantage to applying for a bigger grant or a smaller grant. Though we'll be reviewing all of them together.
I was just going to say that it may also be the case that we really love your project, but we can't fund the full amount, and then we could have a discussion with you about the actual grant size that we give, and maybe you would find match funding from another source to go alongside that.
Yes. Yeah, fab, thank you. Which actually that speaks to Andrea's question about can the grant be used to match fund a project? Absolutely. We really, really like the idea of our grants coming alongside other funding that you have. And the reason for that is that bitter experience tells us that when your projects are funded by one funder, local commissioners don't necessarily feel the buy-in to that work. And so then when that project comes to an end, it's much harder for those projects to be sustained than when you've got local commissioners and potentially a foundation funder like ourselves for that work to be continued locally. Again, we recognize that that's not, it's harder for you to try and find that much funding, but we hope that, again, using us as a hook to get your local commissioners to have good conversations with you is useful, if not in this funding round, then in future funding rounds. And it's probably worth emphasizing that this is the first of what we see as many, many funding rounds to come over future years. I've noticed on the attendee list, we've got some colleagues who are commissioning colleagues on the call. So if you're part of a local authority or perhaps an ICB and you're listening to this, we hope that this means that you'll be reaching out to the charities in your local area and having conversations with them about how you can support their applications to our grants. Again, for areas that are likely to receive Family Hubs and Start for Life funding, there could be a perfect match there. But we know that there are some really passionate commissioners in areas that haven't received Family Hubs and Start for Life funding, who might also be thinking about how they can contribute to this really important work for babies.
I think there's an interesting question from James about whether we could fund an older age group as part of funding the age group up to 24 months. Is that possible?
It is not possible. And that is not to say that 36-month-olds are not important. And I've got a 3-year-old at home, so I think that 3-year-olds are really, really important. But what we are recognizing as a foundation is that the 1001 days from pregnancy to age 2 is an especially important window for shaping future development. So we would really like for all of the grants that we award to be focused in that 1001 day window. I'm sorry, James, I know that's not going to be the answer that you're hoping for. It's not to dismiss the work you're doing with toddlers. That is very, very important too.
Mm-hmm. There's also a question from Val. Do you prefer work in a local area or more widely across the country?
What a great question. I don't think we've got a preference for that. We would be very, very open to either of those options.
And then just to add to that, we basically don't have a particular area of deprivation or particular areas we're looking at. So it's anywhere in Scotland, Wales, England, or Northern Ireland.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you for that, Kat. And then a question from Anna about outcome measures. So at the end of our guidance for charities to apply, we put some guiding principles around evaluation. Again, where possible, we'd like them to align with the Family Hubs and Start for Life evaluation. And the rationale for that is that one of the things that we think we can really do as a foundation to amplify the work that's out there supporting babies is to try and join the dots and make to aggregate outcomes from as many different services as possible to make a really clear case for further investment in babies. So as much consistency in outcome measures as possible would be brilliant, because that means that we can make a really strong case on all of your behalves that that investing in babies is not optional. There will be many, many situations that you will be looking at that guidance and thinking, actually, that doesn't fit with what we're providing in our local area. If that's the case, then we will be very happy to be led by you in terms of the best way for you to evaluate your service. We've put some kind of core principles in there that we think would be relatively universal. So, for example, we really like the idea of using goal-based outcome measures because they can be tailored to the unique needs of every baby and family that come across your service, whether you're an infant feeding service or a mental health service. But we also recognize that there will be charities on this call who have brilliantly robust evaluation procedures that they've been using for a really long time, and deviating from your very well-established evaluation protocol just to meet our needs as a funder would be unhelpful to the case that you can make in your local area and potentially nationally for babies as well. So where that's the case, we wouldn't be forcing you to change in order to meet our needs. But the guiding principle that's in our mind as we think about outcome measures is that you are committed to measuring your impact, because we think that's so important, that you would strive for consistency where that's possible, and that we would talk to you if you've already got some really robust measures, so you don't have to feel like we're mandating new procedures on you where they're not helpful. Is there anything I've missed there, Kat?
No, I don't think so.
I think my passion for research and data shone through then for a second, didn't it?
Definitely. I was wondering if the next question is from Kirsty about, could we fund work focusing on pregnant women and mothers as a means to supporting their babies?
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. So the 1,000 days covers that time of pregnancy. And it's one of the reasons why, wherever possible, we try to avoid using kind of 0 to 2 as a description, because some people think that 0 begins at birth, if that makes sense. So the 1,001 critical days covers that time of pregnancy. And we know that experiences of women in pregnancy have a real impact on babies developing in utero. So we would love to see some projects that support pregnancy as well as families with babies under the age of 2.
I think Kirsty also asked about whether we would fund campaigning and advocacy and systems change work as well as direct services. And I think the answer to that is no, we cannot fund that.
Yes, that is true. It might be that is part of the work that you are delivering. So, for example, if you're collecting outcomes, then you're probably thinking about how you use your outcomes to influence your local systems change. And if you are doing that, then we would love to talk to you about how we can amplify your voice as a grantee. But we wouldn't be able to fund solely work that is about campaigning and advocacy. But it's a very good question, because, again, we absolutely recognize how important that is.
And then the next one is from Juliet. Can we apply for full cost recovery?
Yes, absolutely. And I guess I would point to the idea that we would prefer funding projects where there are other donors also providing some funds. So yes, and is the answer to that question. Kat, is there anything that you'd add?
No, I think it's really important. I think as a funder, we'd want to make sure that we do cover the full cost. We don't want to leave you unable to cover the the lighting or the internet as part of your project. So please do include the things that are really important to your project as part of it.
Yeah, and transparency from your perspective about kind of what is covered in those costs, like what it is that you're hoping that we are paying for, will help us to assess that properly.
And then I guess on the same subject, Catherine's asked about what's an appropriate percentage of overheads to include.
That is an age-old question, isn't it? I think most charities would cover overhead costs at around a 10% mark. What's again really important is for that you tell us what's included in that, because there'll be some charities that have higher overheads, but it's because they're covering things that are typically included in a different budget line. So please tell us what the overheads are and give us as much detail as possible to help us to understand what it is that we'll be funding.
And just, I guess, to add to that, for example, if you're setting up a new project, we would anticipate that there would be higher overhead costs associated with it because you're setting up for the first time. So there's a lot of different reasons why that might be the case. So we just want to have a conversation with you about that during the application.
Yes, and I guess that links to kind of year by year what your expenditure might be. So we might expect to see some slightly higher overhead costs in year 1, but then reducing in years 2 and 3. So we'll trust you to be transparent and open with us as that, and you can trust us that we will try our very best to be fair and supportive and collaborative as a funder. So we have a question from Morag about applications from collaborations. Yes, absolutely. Just as babies thrive when they have multiple secure attachment relationships, we think families thrive when there are multiple charities working together to support their needs. So we would absolutely welcome collaborations from charities. The thing that raises in my mind is that we haven't left you very long to apply for this grant. And so I just want to kind of acknowledge that that's the case for this first grant round. We decided to press on with opening the grant applications, recognizing that we were giving you a tight kind of turnaround for our first application process in order that we can get funding out the door in what is our first year of operating as a charity, rather than giving you a longer window, but then holding on to our funds for longer. So we recognize that it might be harder for you to collaborate and get a joint application submitted, but we absolutely would welcome that. Anything you'd add there, Kat?
No, I don't think so. Oh, just trying to scroll down to the next question. Next question would be, when the foundation considers funding core costs, would the foundation, consider funding core costs of an eligible organization?
Yes, as long as what we mean by that is that then that enables you to deliver the work that has an impact for babies. If it was hard for us to see how core costs map onto the support that you're delivering for babies, then that wouldn't be eligible.
So I think maybe to add a little bit more, or to even ask a clarification question, we wouldn't fund, for example, 20% of your overheads towards your entire organization. It would have to be a project that's tangible, which had some core costs included within that, rather than just core costs standing on their own.
Yeah, that's helpful. If that's not what you mean, please do add a comment to that question, and we'll pick it up in the FAQ. There's a question from Cordelia about if you apply for charity grants, what does that mean for research grants? We see them as unrelated. So yes, there would be an opportunity for future research grant applications as well as charity grant applications. It's worth noting that we haven't got the clear guidance and parameters around how we'll approach our research grants in the same way that we've got for our charity grants at the moment. So, for example, if the responses to the survey that I mentioned earlier tell us that we absolutely have to be funding the latest research into gut biome and how we help babies to have the healthiest gut in order to have the best start for life, then we might put out a very specific call for research projects or research evaluations that can test what works to support babies in that way. So it's likely to look and feel very different for research as it does for charity grants, but there would be no dependency from one and the other.
There's an interesting question from Lucy about whether we would fund pilot projects or if we prefer tried and tested work.
What a lovely question. So the thing that is in my mind is around evidence. So if you have a really clear rationale for a brand new project based drawing on evidence, whether that's kind of the latest RCT or some practice-based evidence, then we would absolutely fund new work that hasn't been done before, but comes with a really clear evaluation plan for building on that practice-based evidence. But that doesn't mean that we're only interested in chasing the next shiny thing to support babies and families. So if you've got a tried and tested intervention and what you need is some extra funding to expand it, to roll it out, to test it in a new area or with a different client group, then we're also very open to that too. Does that answer the question, Kat, or have I answered a slightly different question?
No, I think so.
Fabulous.
Yep.
Okay, that's probably slightly related to Val's question, which is, could we directly focus only on babies with additional needs or disabilities or who have experienced domestic abuse? And the answer there is absolutely. Again, we'd go back to the idea of the family hub. So what we wouldn't want you to do is to set up this kind of service in a really different place where people have to go and find their way there. And do they go to the family hub or do they come to this other different place to access this support? And actually, does that different place put them at risk of experiencing greater stigma or shame if they if they go there for support? So absolutely, we would fund that sort of work as long as it's embedded within the family hub-esque model.
There is another question. How many awards do you expect to make in this funding round? And are you happy to tell us how much the total funding pot available is? So it's 1 million that we have available in the first funding round. It's hard to say how many grants we will award. It's probably likely to be somewhere between 10 and 12.
Yeah. That's proper finger in the air averages. Kat and I have spreadsheets where we've worked out what if this many charities apply, but they only want that much, how many would that be? So we can't be more specific at this point. And we apologize because we know that that's really important to you in evaluating whether you might apply for a grant or not. But as it's our first round, we invite you to be with us on our learning journey as we apply our guidelines to this first round of grant funding.
I think we will also, in the future, we will publish what percentage of applications were successful as well, so you can kind of gauge how likely your application is to be successful.
Yes, transparency will be key. So as soon as we have more data about the people who apply and how many grants we give and how much funding they each receive, we will absolutely share that with you. And then we've probably got time for one last question, and it looks like it's Sarah's question. Hi, Sarah. Would the grants only fund clinical work, or could proposals that cover things like guides, resources, and development of apps be covered? We wouldn't want to fund things like guides and resources if they are outside of funding direct support for babies. And that goes back to one of our core values around being action focused and wanting to really clearly see the link between what it is that we're funding and the specific impact that that's having for babies. And I know we could create a theory of change that says, if we develop this resource and then train people on it and then all of them use it to support babies, that we could kind of demonstrate that impact. But what we really want to fund is project where that link is just a little bit more direct. So if there's a resource that you're producing whilst delivering that work, absolutely. If it's the resource alone without the impact, without that direct work, then that falls outside of our remit for now. Fab. I think, Kat, does that bring us to the end of our time together?
Yes, it does.
Thank you so much to everyone for asking such brilliant questions. I've had genuine, you can probably tell, a lovely time thinking about these questions with you. Kat and I have been having so many conversations about this process, and it's lovely to see it coming to life in conversation with you. Please do feel free to add more questions to the chat. We will be circulating that frequently asked questions document. I will also be sharing that link for you to feedback on how you experienced this webinar and how we can improve them going forward. Collaboration in terms of starters we need to go on. I've also spotted the question about how you can complete our research survey, so we'll include that link as well for you. But thank you so much for giving your time and for absolutely sharing your passion to give every baby the best start for life. It's been a privilege to speak with you, and we look forward to speaking with you again very soon.